Okay, well that was on Tuesday's YouTube, so it's fine. That wasn't that. Good afternoon to all. Geeks out there, and welcome to another Monday night podcast with the one, the only Tunes down at the bottom, and ourselves, the SA Geeks, and as always, you know, we have a special guest. Today, our special guest is Rob. I don't know your surname.
Acton. Rob Acton.
Like action, but there's no I in it.
There's no I.
Okay, Rob Acton, yes. A board game designer from Durban?
Mars.
Mars. That's where all the best designers are
from. I'm from Cape Town, actually.
Cape Town! Okay, so yeah. I was way off. But...
It's close enough.
Anyway, yes, we're going to talk board games and whatnot today. This is Tunes' favorite subject. He loves board games.
I love games in general, but board games are one of my more recent forays into gaming. But before we start, Rob, why don't you give us a rundown of who you are and what you do in this type of space?
Okay. Well, my name is Rob Acton, and I'm just turned 50 years old.
Oh, jeez. You look 30.
I have been in and around gaming since I was a little kid, in various forms or another. Mostly just playing them. And then, like most people over the years, got into the role-playing games. When I say like most people, I mean like most people that ultimately end up in game design. And role-playing games, the design space that you have in that led to designing my own role-playing games, and eventually about 6 or 7 years ago, or maybe 8 years ago, was introduced by someone that I met who said, look, I'm into games and I've got a board game collection, and do you guys want to come play? And we went to his house, and I couldn't believe it. The guy had 250 designer board games. I didn't even know that world existed. And that while I had been playing role-playing games, there'd been this kind of revolution of analog gaming. It's not a big movement compared to digital gaming at this point, but its growth is outstripping digital games at the moment. So it's been, that playing a lot of games. I mean, I suppose it's just my nature. I want to tinker with things. Computing, I was born in the DOS era where you couldn't have a computer if you weren't going to tinker with it at some point. You couldn't run a game without reconfiguring the memory. And that sort of tinkering mentality has just been part of who I am, and it's led to me designing my own games and ultimately starting a publication company. And we've produced one published game, which is a small card game called Ambition. And there's plenty of plans going forward to increase the number of games we're going to produce. So I've gone from game player to game designer to game publisher. That's parallel to what I normally do, which is I'm an advocate. I'm a litigation specialist. So those are the two worlds that I occupy: the analytical, I suppose, which is the law, and then the creative, which I do the gaming. It's a very brief overview.
So what's some of your earliest memories playing tabletop games? Like what's some of the things that stick out to you from the early days?
It's interesting. And I don't know if anyone's ever done any surveys, but growing up in the late 70s, most sort of families had board games. It was just a weird thing. People had Monopoly and Risk and games which were by no means family games in any sense of the word, but every family had them and they were all playing them. And so that was my earliest memories. Is my mom was a single mother, so she was working, and my brother and I would go across to the neighbors, and they were hippies who decided that their children needed to learn to play Mahjong at the age of 6 and Risk at the age of 7. And so literally every afternoon was spent playing games with them, and it just became sort of second nature. Old games, like, I don't know if there was a game called Careers back in the day. There was a strange thing. Do you remember Careers?
Yeah, my dad made me play that one.
Curious was, it was ahead of its time because it had the system where you basically, it was a crap, by today's standards, it was a crap game, but you were, what it had that was unique was at the beginning you had a little piece of paper and you could choose whether you wanted to be good, you wanted to develop in, I think it was happiness, wealth, or fame were the three things, and you could set your own targets for the game in those three parameters. And you won if you achieved those targets, which I thought, which at least was quite forward-thinking for its day. But otherwise it was just 4.5-hour games of Monopoly, which went on forever, and people ended up hating each other.
Yeah, Monopoly does. I think after an hour or two, it just gets ridiculous. And
yeah, it's an hour of fun crammed into a 3.5-hour game.
Yeah. It's crazy. But speaking of bad games, what are some of the worst games you've ever played?
Wow, jeez. You mean without defaming anybody?
Yeah.
Some of the worst games. Well, those old games, at the time they were brilliant because they were all we had. But when you look back on them with what we know now about modern games, Monopoly's dreadful. It's a game that just spirals and spirals and gets longer and longer and longer. And Risk, which is such a big popular game, half an hour to 40 minutes into a game of Risk that you're going to lose, but it takes another 3.5 hours for that to happen. And that's just, by modern standards, that's crap design.
It's not fun.
But for some reason, as kids, we still, loved it. Couldn't work out why we felt so much aggression toward each other afterwards. But that's it.
Do you think
there's a game that people like called Munchkin? I don't know if any of you have ever played it.
Yeah, I've played Munchkin.
Yeah.
Munchkin is dreadful. It is also like a game which has got a gimmick, and the gimmick is ripping off role-playing games, and that's fun and it's hilarious and it's self-referential. But after about 40 minutes, you think this must be over now, and you still got another hour and a half to play. I think it's horrific.
Yeah.
One of those self-flagellation games.
Yeah, pretty much.
In Munchkin, there's a lot of backstabbing in Munchkin, so the relationships don't end up very well.
I love. As a friend of mine describes them as Naya Mikey's Spielickies.
It sounds like Deceit.
Yeah, no, Deceit is different though. Deceit is
it's not a board game.
Literally kick your friends' asses.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that in games. Look, the modern sensibility these days, a lot of people in gaming are very anti this kind of this sort of be mean to each other for a laugh kind of thing, and it's become a bit out of vogue. But I love it. It's still fun. As long as you're playing with the right people who understand, the spirit that's been played in. I think it's fantastic.
It's the group that kind of decides which type of games are more fun to play.
Exactly.
Yeah. I myself prefer cooperative games. I don't like the backstabby stuff.
Oh, you're such a tree hugger.
I'm a biologist. What did you expect? On the other side, what are some of your favorite games?
Well, I like. There's a lot of great games out, and there's kind of two main. Well, there were sort of two main streams of board games, generally described as Euro games and Ameritrash. On the Euro games are your thinky, puzzly, intellectual games that don't have much luck involved, and your Ameritrash is generally involves lots of rolling of dice and electronic components that make noises and use batteries, and sort of between the two, your best games these days are kind of combining both elements. There's a game called Lords of Waterdeep, which is a so-called worker placement game, which I really love. I then also like the kind of sort of more Euro-style games like Castles of Burgundy, things like that. But I do like a good Ameritrash game every now and then. Throw some dice, kick in the door, have some fun, and have a drink or two. I also like that kind of style of game.
Because what would you
Doesn't
like
have
to
to be
know
in that
from
order.
What inspired the story and gameplay in Ambition?
Sure. So yeah, as I said, I mean, I started off in role-playing games. So 15 years of playing role-playing games and dungeon mastering and running games, creating worlds for the games to take place in. So there's a lot of sort of my own laws built up in my head, and it was quite easy just to take some of that law and put it into what is a very narrow kind of card game. So yeah, the world that it's set in is a world that I've run and my players have played role-playing games in for some time. It's a kind of weird semi-African environment where there's been some natural disaster, and the effect is that all the snakes and insects have got massive, and they're all sort of giants. It's kind of a lost world, kind of lost in time sort of vibe. And the people that have survived are the ones on the sort of top, the high points in the mountains, but all the creepy crawlies that are now oversized are sort of and have grown intelligent are kind of the overlords, and that's the world it's set in.
Okay, so is that a long-running campaign that you've been running over the years?
It's actually not. I mean, it's one of the shortest. It's one that literally lasted, I don't know if it even lasted a couple of months, and that was it. It didn't go further than that. And maybe that's why I've used it for the games, because it's not one that's had all this development and history. It's one that's still pretty much in its infancy.
Okay. That's interesting. So it wasn't that much of a baby.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's not, exactly. It's easier to kill it.
It's easier to kill it. Do you have a long-running campaign, or what's the longest campaign you've run?
Role-playing games.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm running. I kind of do my own homebrew version of D&D 5th edition, and I have a regular group of players that we've been playing in various forms since the early 90s or mid 90s.
Oh, jeez. It's a long time.
And we play once every 2 weeks, and then since lockdown, we've been playing far more often using Zoom, etc. Literally twice a week on occasion. And then I've just started a new game with a whole lot of creatives. In fact, we've got our first session tomorrow night, and I'm really looking forward to that, because it's people that are in the game design and a couple of writers and people that write material for various role-playing games. And playing with them is going to be very interesting, because they're all, they've been sending in character backstories already, and they are fascinating. I'm actually feeling a bit of pressure, I must say.
Yeah, that sounds cool, actually. It's good to play with, I think, different people from different backgrounds.
Yeah, definitely. You do get into a rut, I think, playing with the same people regularly, and you understand each other, and it's comfortable. But when you're with other people that you've never played with before, you tend to, I think, you bring out the best in each other, mainly because you're just nervous and you don't want to look like an arsehole.
How exactly did you get into D&D?
It's kind of a weird story. I don't know if you guys you remember the movie E.T.?
Yeah.
No, very barely.
Well, in E.T., there's a very it's irrelevant to the movie, but there's an opening scene in E.T. in a house in America in the 80s, kind of suburban, where I think the main kid and his friends are playing D&D. And you only see it for about a second and a half. But I had the book. They used to, whenever a big movie came out, they would always, I don't know if they still do this, but they would always produce a sort of novel, get some poor writer to cobble together a novel based on the movie, and he or she would then write a novel which followed the script of the movie. And I read the novel before I saw the movie, and there's a much longer scene in the book which explains these kids playing Dungeons and Dragons. And I was just fascinated reading it. I thought, this is like, it just hit I don't know, it struck a chord. I wasn't sure exactly what it was, and I just knew I wanted to get involved and play this kind of game. And then this poor kid, I was at school with an American kid. I think his dad was a diplomat or something, and he made the mistake of mentioning to me one day that he, back in the States, had played Dungeons and Dragons. This was, I think, in 83 or 83 probably, and I just didn't leave him alone. I literally mined his head for information about this game. The poor guy. I think about it now. If you're out there, I think Ty Morton. If you're out there, I'm sorry, man. I probably ran his school out. Just just literally writing down what he said about a game he played, and then in '83, out of the blue, walked into CNA in what was then Santon City, and the AD&D first edition player's handbook was sitting in CNA, and that was it. Just bought it and been playing ever since.
Jeez, that's old school.
It's just weird to think that D&D books were sold in CNA, but anyway.
I wonder if you can get them now. I don't know when last I've been in the CNA.
It's going full circle, that you probably get, you know, you get them in exclusive books now. So that,
Yeah.
I don't think so.
nah, I don't think you can get anything in CNA at the moment. To be
Anything
honest.
useful. Oh, at the moment, yeah. I don't think CNA counts as a
It's not an essential service.
essential service.
Oh, no.
Was it ever really essential? That's the question.
Those cheap packs of Lever Arch files, I think those are essential.
Yeah, especially for an advocate. I think you need tons of those things. So, speaking of advocate, how did you go from that to starting action games?
Oh, geez, I don't know. I think one is probably a reaction to the other. You know, I mean, laws and litigation is exciting, and there's a lot of adrenaline in it, and it's pretty intense, but it's not creative. It's analytical, and it's. I think it was just doing it for enough years and realizing that I needed some other outlet to, you know, to exercise some other part of me, and that other part of me was that thing, which is game design. I suspect, you know, sounding very psychologized at the moment, but you know, that's what I think.
Trying to psychoanalyze yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought you were a lawyer.
Yeah. It's a worth thing for a lawyer because you're trying to psychoanalyze and charge yourself at the same time.
Have you found that any of your game design or any of that bleeds into the lawyer stuff now, or is it completely separate, those two lives?
I think it's more the other way around. I find that you know, I mean, litigation to a large extent is dealing with massive amounts of it's dealing with complex systems in terms of like the facts of any case, and I think that's come through into what I like in games and the way I design games. I mean, I love complexity. So the games I like invariably involve some level of complexity. And I think also with the role-playing games, like I like having a big complex system in my head at one time and managing it, you know. But I don't think it works the other way around. You know, people often say to me, like, you know, what do the lawyers think when they hear you're a game designer? And they're pretty cool, I must say. I have more problems the other way around when gamers hear that I'm a lawyer.
Are you a rules lawyer or just a regular lawyer?
Yeah, and rules lawyers, I hate rules lawyers. That's one thing. Like if I'm running a D&D game and some clown decides to refer me to a page in a manual, that's the end of that character.
Rocks fall, and he does.
Rocks fall, lightning flashes.
Kez, you want to ask anything?
Oh, the one question that I have for you is, when you were in our dungeon, did we play his game?
Yes, we played Ambition, the one with the cards and trying to figure out who to block and stuff. I must say, I mean, I've said online but not in person, but I think like Ambition is a very like well designed, very small game. It's like it takes very few pieces and it creates this like meta game around it, which I thought was pretty cool. Yeah, which I thought was pretty cool.
I do appreciate it because that is the intention, is to have two games, you know, the simple game on the table in front of you, but the more complex game hovering in the air between us, and that's what I like to do.
Yeah. And there's
basically.
Yeah, I remember Ross was not impressed. He kept getting blocked randomly.
Nailed by both of you the whole time.
Yeah.
These two were real assholes about it.
No, I have you. Look, you got to pick who you play with.
Yeah, No, don't play with my wife. She's a bitch, Jesus. Make sure that she beats the crap out of me at any given point.
Well, that game it's mean. I mean, it's supposed to be. You know, there's no second place. There's no draws.
It is.
That's why I love playing games too.
It's also it's very mean to teach it to somebody for the first time. Because the first time experience is the worst. Like it's almost inevitable that the player is going to lose and going to have a rough time about it. But when they learn the game and they actually figure out what's going on, then only you actually can start playing, and that's when it becomes fun.
It's my favorite moment is that second game, about a third of the way in, where you just see this
the click,
this mean switch go on in their head, and they're like, okay, well, wait a second. I know how to do this now. You're in for it, and I love that. But it is. I mean, the other thing that I often find with people, when you say it's a card game, the first thing people say, well, I can't play until I know what every card does. I'm uncomfortable. I need to know what every one of these cards does before I can play. And I think that's also the difficulty that I have teaching the game, is that you don't really need to. You experiment. Well, I mean, I find I'm not a competitive person, so when I play games, I'm not the most competitive. I don't mind losing games, and I didn't realize that Ambition has developed a really competitive scene here in and around Cape Town, where the people are kind of, I get queries about rules and stuff, which are pretty intense. And people get very upset if I say to them sometimes, look, just play a game, just play around, see how it goes, just experiment with cards and just get used to it. No, people are not into that. I want to be able to, and this is modern design. In most modern games, you need to be competitive from the moment you start after you read the rules. And that's quite a tricky thing to design for. Yeah,
for sure. The last time I spoke to you, you said there was a expansion on the horizon. Where's that?
Yeah, it's still on the horizon in the sense that it's done, it's built. It's 16 new cards to go with the 16 that are in the game, and they just broaden the parameters to make it a bit easier. For beginning players, it's going to be structured so that there'll be suggested decks based on your level of play. It's quite daunting to throw 32 cards into that game and expect you to know everything immediately. So there's going to be various options. But I mean, what we're playing mostly is 32 cards, all of them in, and then you can play up to 6 players quite comfortably. Will it be published? And that's another story. You need to sell. If you want an expansion to a game, you need to sell. Basically, you can if you sell 1,000 games, to sell 1,000 expansions, you on average need to sell 3,000 games, because you normally about a 1/3 pickup on expansions, and we're not there yet, so it's still in the cupboard.
How do you feel when you see people playing your game? Do you watch them playing it, or do you just hear afterwards the stories?
It's the best. It's the best experience. It happened to me a few months ago. Just going to a restaurant with friends, walking past the table and seeing people playing the game. I didn't know them. I don't know where they got the game from, but that was that's an amazing feeling. Then resisting the urge not to be a complete douchebag and go up and tell them. That's the next thing. No, but it's great. It's the best part of it.
Yeah.
Thinking that you can make something and they can go out into the world and people can actually have fun with it is an awesome feeling.
Nice.
A question.
No, now I'm not going to, because he's actually forced it on me. I'm not going to do it.
Don't force.
Object, what would be your dream game to design?
Pretty bad at asking questions. You don't make it look natural when you do
Money is kind of irrelevant from a design point of view, and time for that matter, because we've all got time.
Now,
But any time. I mean, if you want something, if you're passionate about something, you'll make time to do it. You know, it's just as simple as that. If you want something enough, you'll find the time. And money, the difficulty, the money you need is what you need to publish the game. But to design it, you can design out of scraps of paper. But to answer the question properly, it would be some enormous 6-hour marathon game that would involve asymmetrical factions, massive amounts of immersion, and would take forever to play.
You have to take off from work to play the board game. You got to take leave.
There's a great board game out there at the moment called Twilight Imperium.
Twilight Imperium, yeah.
Twilight Imperium.
Hours.
It averages at around 10 hours.
Yeah, I think we played.
We got, I think, about 8 or 6 hours.
Yeah, I think
That's
about 10 hours.
We didn't even finish the game.
We did.
Really?
Yes, I kicked your asses off out of the planet, out of the universe.
But we did like a quick game, I think.
No, remember, I know the shit out of you guys.
But it takes really long.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of game I would design if I could.
No, you were the first to attack me. You attacked me with your tiny little feet, and I annihilated you.
We're definitely talking about the same game.
Yeah. I've yet to experience Twilight Imperium, but from what I hear, like, I don't know whether I want to. I could play
when the rules explanation takes an hour and 10 minutes.
But it took me a lot of time to finish.
Yeah, and also, you need to not think like that. You need to think like that.
You gotta play chess, not checkers.
And
I've played it a couple of times, but I found it pretty exhausting. I find that after like 4 hours, I just, my concentration level is shattered. I think you need to have like make it a whole day thing and have a lunch in between or something like that.
Yeah, no, you need to. It's a hectic game. Okay, so what do you do when you're not playing or making games?
Consuming game-related media, massive amounts of it.
So pretty much game.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, at the moment, my thing is all D&D stuff, all role-playing game stuff. I'm just absorbing every channel there is, except for anything with Joe Manganiello on it.
Shame. Why don't you like Joe?
Because he's trying to insert himself into the hobby as a fixture. He thinks he's bigger than the game. That's why.
Who is the person you guys are talking about?
Joe Manganiello. He's an actor.
He's an actor. He's married to Sofia Vergara. She was in Modern Family. Anyway, he's a guy who played D&D back in the day, and has now seen the niche for, being an expert on D&D, and he's made various channels.
Will Wheaton.
Yeah, but Will Wheaton is got a bit of street cred.
No, sorry.
I never thought I'd say that sentence.
I think that shit on Next Generation is not street cred. That's just
that's what I mean. Yeah, I know. He was so cool.
He's an idiot, man.
I mean, I like Will Wheaton. I know everybody hates him, but I like Will Wheaton.
Yeah, no, he's alright. He's no Joe Manganiello.
Yeah. How do you feel about Vin Diesel?
Vin Diesel's cool. Vin Diesel's a guy who played D&D, and now every now and then he gets invited to a celebrity game, but he doesn't try to be D&D, the face of D&D,
Yeah, I kind of get where you're coming from, because like Joe already has I think like a t-shirt company or something that's like D&D based, so he's definitely forcing it a bit. But also I think he's having fun with it as well. It's a bit tough to say what people's actual intentions are, but he's definitely pushing it harder than other celebrities who are getting into it now.
Yeah. I mean, I know he's very involved. I mean, he actually, either does or did own the rights for a D&D movie that he was flogging around Hollywood. I mean, he's very involved in the hobby. It just feels like he wants to own it to me.
You can't own something like this. You piss off a lot of geeks and nerds around the
That's
world.
one of them. Yeah.
Too, trust me.
You told us what you don't like, but what are your favorite creators in that space?
Oh man, there's a crew called WebDM.
Oh yeah.
WebDM is fantastic.
Jim Davis and
Jim Davis, and Pruitt, somebody. Those guys, and there's another guy who I think his channel is called Taking 20 or Rolling 20 or something. Yeah, he's quite controversial, but he's like really good quality content. Those two are probably my favorite.
What about our local guy, Guy?
Yeah.
Our local guy.
I'm not sure. I mean, I've met Guy at a convention, actually. He seems like a really nice guy. This is just this joke's going to go forever. I'm never really sure whether he's being serious or whether that's really him, you know? Yeah. I've never met a South African who speaks like that.
Yeah. Well, he's like an actor or a director or something. So he's like a thespian type, I think.
Yes.
I think that's why he is like that. But when I started, consuming stuff, I used to watch them, and like Carla Harris, who we're gonna have on the podcast, she came out of the work that they did with Bacon Battalion. Yeah, she managed that channel, How to Be a Great Game Master, which is a really long YouTube channel name, but he made it work somehow. Yeah. Yeah. What do you guys have to ask?
We have to ask.
What do you have?
Why do you keep highlighting questions? Stop it.
What's your favorite part of running D&D sessions?
What I like about role-playing games is that they go in directions that you don't expect. That's my favorite, and then having to sort of run with it. Not scripting it and not just doing a setup and then watching where it goes and trying to stay on it. You know, that I love. That's, in fact, in all games, any kind of emergent gameplay which wasn't anticipated by the programmer, that's my favorite.
And if you have that session or that part where people go like off script or whatever, do you try and get them back? And if so, how do you do it? Do you just like roll with it? Like Chooch did when we played D&D and I took him like way off the park? Or do you just say, okay guys, let's try and find our way back? How do you handle those situations?
I'm a strict rule of going with whatever happens. I mean, I have some I have a lot of players who know this, so they kind of they do. You know, there's a certain amount of buy-in whenever you present a situation. I mean, most players kind of operate within a certain sort of broad area, but even if they go completely off script, I'll try and push that as far as possible and just go with it and then just adapt accordingly. But you know, as they say, when you prepare stuff for a D&D session, everything gets reused at some point or another. You know, the players don't know that, but this little encounter that I prepared and spent 3 hours, I swear I'm not going to waste. So whether it happens here or here, it's going to happen.
It's gonna happen.
The trick is selling the illusion that it's a brand new thing, I suppose.
Yeah, no, it's definitely one of those things you do as a DM. Also, if you're running multiple groups, those groups will see the same encounter. They won't know it, but I made the mistake once of having a map twice in a game. Not in the same session, but my players like picked up on it. It was 2 different campaigns, but it was like a map that I really enjoyed, so I used it again. But yeah,
I mean, players can smell bullshit as well. Just to answer the question, I mean, I actually played in a role-playing game a few years ago, and it was Warhammer 40k RPG. and the guy who was running it was like really like hugely keen on that RPG. He knew everything, and he was going to introduce us all. And they literally came to a fork in a corridor, and we said we're going to go left, and he said no, but sounds like the what you're looking for is to the right, and we're like, yeah, well, we want to go left, and he said no, actually guys, I think what you really want to be doing here is going right. And then of course that made it worse. Everyone said we want to go left, and that session ended with him storming out of the house where it was being run, and never playing again with anyone in that group. And it created a huge problem.
It's rough. Yeah.
At least make them linear, otherwise it's going to be an issue.
Yeah. Then nobody wants to be on a railway track either.
Yeah. You kind of have to create the illusion as well. Like keep them on a rail, but don't make them feel like they're on a rail. It's just like this tight rope you have to walk.
Yeah, like you said, we feel like going left. Okay, you go left. The same encounter happens, but they don't know that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, what happens behind the screen stays behind the screen.
Yeah, they don't need to know.
I mean, you can have a great experience like that. Players don't need to know what's going on.
Speaking of Warhammer 40k, what other game systems have you played, and what would you like to play, but you're probably never going to have the chance to learn how to play or run it?
The thing about role-playing games, though, is playing them any role-playing game, you just have to pitch up at a table with people that know how to play it, and you'll be in. That's the one beauty of that kind of part of the hobby is you have a character sheet. You can go sit at a table and you'll have a great time without knowing one rule when you sit down there, and that's how people get in. So what would I like to play? Man, I love Dungeon World. It's a sort of kind of more free form homage to D&D. I love some of the more modern, like story-based games. There's a game called Fiasco, which is, we don't have a DM, but it's basically like a Coen Brothers movie. I think the byline for every scenario is high ambition, low impulse control. So you get characters. There's this little bit of scenario and then there's a kick which turns it on its head, and the whole thing goes pear-shaped, and it's brilliant. And they're all very sort of modern RPG kind of system. And those are great. And then the old school stuff, old versions of D&D where you had a character who started the game with 2 hit points, and you died if you were on 0. I like all those versions.
So you don't like the AD&D version where if you're on 0 you're just unconscious?
No. It was cruel back in the day. I mean, you literally could theoretically have a wizard who started with 1 or 2 hit points and would be dead if he ever went to 0.
Yeah.
It's like everyone stand in front of the wizard, he cannot die.
but precisely, I mean, that is brilliant design, because everyone had to stand in front of the wizard. The fighter, whoever it was, had to protect the wizard, and that created a team dynamic, as opposed to now where you've all got these super powerful edgelords who can kind of do whatever they want.
Yeah, it actually takes a lot of effort to kill play characters in 85E now.
It does, yeah. It's if you got a cleric in the party, no one's gonna die.
No.
No, I would make a monster that would kill him.
Yeah, that's it. That's the thing. It
rips your arms off.
Yeah. Or just kills your cleric.
Yeah, exactly.
Rocks spawn the cleric every session.
You actually have a big level monster. The first question it asks is, any one of you a cleric?
Just all the goblins just like kill the cleric. The first thing they do. That's the only tactic they all have. You're like, once we kill the cleric.
Makes sense. Yeah, then you get into that vindictive DMing vibe where it's like, I dungeon master because I know how my group play and I want to try and kill them.
Yeah, I don't like that type of play. I don't think I've ever been in that type of session like that where the DM is like trying to kill you. But I don't think I would enjoy that. One of the games that I don't enjoy playing with is when the DM is too strict on the rules and like plays rules as written on like silly things. Like if you ask them, okay, I want to glance in that direction, and then he's like, oh, that cost you your action. I was like, really? That cost me my action?
Yeah.
Like, what?
And in no version of the rules does a glance cost you an action. That is, that's not. I think that's a D&D. That's a D&D problem. I think that's a being a dick problem.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I mean, in the olden days, I mean, I'm talking about in the 80s. I mean, DMing, the concept of a DM has changed hugely. These days, the DM is an arbiter and a referee and a storyteller. But early versions of D&D, Dungeon Masters were very much me against you. It was much more a thing in the. It was just the way you played. Your Dungeon Master was out to kill you, and to be a good Dungeons and Dragons player were the people that could avoid being killed by the Dungeon Master. That was very much part of what the game was about. Far less so today, but it was.
It's more like
part of its history of the style of game.
More like an asymmetric type of game. And now it's a shared storytelling experience, not even a game anymore. What do you think your strengths are when it comes to dungeon mastering? Because dungeon mastering needs like a lot of different avenues and talents and skills. Like, what do you think your top skills and talents are?
I think strengths-wise, I'm quite adaptable, so I can. I know I've been around Dungeons and Dragons long enough not to be sort of worried by scenarios. So I can change quite quickly. That's also my weakness because I tend to change all the time. I redesign rule systems. Players never really, like, whatever session they come to. In my group, the first thing they ask me is, how have the rules changed today? So it's a weakness as well, definitely.
Yeah, you come with like a printout change log, like this is what D&D version 5.26.
Volume 26. Yeah. I'm not even joking. That's about what it is. I've rewritten the D&D player's handbook in literally. I now have about a 300-page document, which is based on that loosely, but it gets changed every session, and the players roll their eyes and they just put up with me, I suppose.
That's really funny. But also, I think is dungeon mastering, like we discussed, I think my last interview, it's like being a DM is like the first step into being a game designer, because you play with the mechanics, and you want it to fit like your style or your group, and because of that you have to fiddle around with it. And it's even in the rules, like the player's handbook and the Dungeon Master Guide, they're reference material. It's not like set in stone rules. So tell us a bit about how like you're trying to fiddle with the rules ended up as you being a designer.
It's just natural. I mean, we somebody once described, the computing to me, the way it changed from its early days, where you were expected to have a level of knowledge to be able to work a personal computer, and you expected to lift up the hood and to tinker with the components. Whereas modern PC and Mac design is don't open the bonnet, please. We will show you what we want to show you, but you're just going to mess things up. So we're going to design. Effectively, what they do these days in operating systems is design motor cars with the bonnet welded shut. And it's, I mean, I get it, because it gives it much more mass appeal. It's not as intimidating for people who are coming into it. But I mean, some people are just by definition tinkerers. The guys who have the car out on a Sunday and open the bonnet and want to mess with air. And I mean, that's a personality. And I think people that have that personality are never sort of satisfied with rules as written. There's always a moment where you think to yourself, I think I can make. Let's just tweak this, and that leads to tweaking that, and I mean, then you're designing, and that's what you're doing. And of course, D&D encourages that, which is why a lot of people go from. I mean, people that are designing board games, so many of them have come up from role-playing games, and they learned to start their design by just making house rules for D&D games. That's certainly my history.
Okay.
So, what's the craziest idea you've had, and did it actually manage to create something?
I've had some pretty crazy game ideas that haven't yet created anything. But
Craziest one, though. Absolute craziest one.
So, yeah, there's an idea that integrates a board game and an augmented reality environment, which I pitched to a couple of people who know more than I do about app design and augmented reality, and they looked at me and they said, "You're an idiot. You know, why would you want to go back to this crap cardboard analog thing and link it to this thing that's so amazing, which is called augmented reality?" And so, yeah, that idea, I don't think it was crazy, but other people do.
They don't get your brain. I understand exactly what
I know exactly what you're trying to do, and it's genius. I think yeah.
Those two are idiots.
You just need to find the right people.
Yeah, you need to find the right developers, because those guys were idiots. Seriously.
Yeah. No.
A developer looks at that. Any app developer that's got half a brain will look at that and go, "That's a bloody good idea. Let's try it."
Yeah,
Because,
and I mean, I've been watching a lot of other modern games. A lot of board games have got an app integration now.
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, the board gaming community is like, "Oh, well, I don't want mine to become a computer game." But if you just take all the admin of board games and you give that admin to a processor, and you just keep the fun on the board, it's amazing. It's incredible. You just enhance the experience.
Yeah.
Oh, dude, I think it's a bloody intelligent idea. That's definitely something that should be done.
Yeah.
Those guys are dumbasses. You know, the truth is, there is definitely. I see something that could work there. You know, maybe broaden your horizons and look for better app designers.
Yeah, I think we all think in boxes. That's the trouble, you know. If I'm in app design, I think only in app design. If I'm a board game designer, I'm only thinking in that niche. We need to think a bit broader.
Yeah.
Look for the I suppose the best way to put it is normies, because normal people would actually look at that and go, "That's actually not a bad idea." You know, over and above the fact that geeks, like full-on geeks, would look at that and say it's a good idea as well. But normies would actually love that kind of thing. You know,
I agree. I mean,
it's something for them to do. I think it's definitely a clever idea.
I feel every board game should have an app. Actually, at the very least, you should have the rules available to you and searchable in some way, because you can't like type in something on a paper and find like a specific rule, you know, whereas you can do it in an app, you know.
Before we came on, it's what I was doing with I don't know if you guys can see it, but so this is the Ambition app that's in development.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so that's a whole new world, I must say. For me, it's been learning about that side of things has been fascinating. It's really cool.
I was actually going to ask you, like, whether you're going to put the rules, at least what the cards do, online, because you normally have to like read the manual and pass it like amongst all the players, especially new players. So having like a reference guide online would be cool for that game.
Yeah, so that'll be it's going to be obviously the app will be the game itself as well, but it will have that functionality, like that sort of very limited, if you're playing it on the table kind of functionality as well.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So when is your game international?
Sorry, mate?
When is your game coming up this side, international side?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to it. I'm actually talking to an international distributor at the moment, and I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say, but I quite soon, I think.
I hope so. We'd love to get a copy of this.
COVID pandemic aside, probably by the end of the year, I hope.
Yeah. Are you gonna do like a version 2 reprint or anything?
Not yet, but I mean, that's just my personality. I've done, it's actually been an interesting discipline, because when you're designing by yourself and you're not publishing, you can change your design every day.
Yeah.
But as soon as you put something out, you have an audience and you have a buying public who have an expectation that you're not just going to immediately change the thing that they've now come to like. Because that just, the last thing you want to see if you just bought the product is 2 weeks later a better product coming out.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, that's like every AAA video game development company out there right now. But we get
yeah, when you make something easy to do. Yeah.
I was actually interested. I went to end of last year. I went to a sort of symposium of some kind in Cape Town, which was basically computer game design houses, and it was a whole lot of speakers, and they had some fascinating. There was so much about the people who design games like me can learn from electronic game design. And the experience that industry has gone through has been. There's so much. They're so far ahead that there's so much you can actually pick up in terms of the mistakes that have been made along the way.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, what mistakes do you see designers make?
Segue.
Neat segue. I don't know what. I don't know. Well, put it this way: the first thing people tell, there's one mistake which people make, and I don't know if that you can say that's a mistake designers make, but everyone has a game. When you speak to anybody, if you go to a gaming convention or whatever, everyone you meet will tell you about their game. Well, what they're actually telling you about is their idea, not their game. There's very few people who have a game, and those are the people that I really respect. If a guy has got a shoebox full of pieces of paper in his car boot that he's just written on scraps, but he can actually play it and show it to you and go through that experience, then that's a game. But having an idea, and I think a lot of people confuse an idea for a game with a game, because all ideas are cool. We've all got great ideas. Yeah. But implementing them into a physical concept and actually producing and something that can engineer fun at a table is a completely different thing. So I think in terms of mistakes people make, the one is thinking they have a game when what they really have is a good idea. I don't know who it was. I think it was Steve Jobs who kept saying that the worst thing you could say when you went for a job interview with him is that you were an ideas person, because we're all ideas people, but we're very few people who can actually do things. And I think it's valuable. The other mistake, which I think is a mistake, and I may be wrong, but I think is a mistake, is people try and be too creative. When they say, I'm gonna create a game that's gonna revolutionize games. And I think that's a mistake, because we learn incrementally and we build on things that have gone before, and it's I was lucky enough when I was at university. The author, what's his name, famous South African author, so famous I can't even remember his name. J.M. Coetzee, and I was lucky enough to go to a creative writing course that he did. And then he made us each had to write a short story and then present it. And this is this great author, so everyone spent forever creating these amazing short stories, or at least we thought so. And then he said, look, you're all trying to be too creative. The English language has developed over hundreds of years, and there's tricks and tips that have developed that work. They work because they're effective, and you must use them. Don't try and reinvent the wheel. What you do creatively is putting all these things together in a different way, and I think that's probably a good lesson for game or any design really. It's incremental what you do, and you don't need to redesign everything from scratch.
Very wise words. Very wise words indeed. Yeah.
I think that point also holds with being like a homebrew dungeon master. Because I think some players expect you to just create things out of nothing, out of nowhere. But those like when you do that, then they don't understand what you did. Like it's much better to reference something that they already know, because then everybody can understand it. Everybody like has some kind of thing they can pull from, some thread. But I find it very like weird when it's like, oh, that's so original when you copied something. It's like, yeah, but it's original because I'm putting it in this game and twisting it for my use.
Yeah, in this context, it is original and feels fresh. And I think that somebody once gave me a tip for running D&D, and I've never forgot it. He said, like, it was this, somebody said, like, what do you do if you've got to come up with something on the fly? And he said, well, imagine it's a tavern. For some reason, your characters decide to go to an inn. He says, just think of a pub that you know in real life. And now just describe the inside of that pub as you see it in your... and of course, if you don't use the name, it becomes this great, detailed, amazing thing that you're just describing actually from memory. But for the players, it seems to be something completely new and unique because they don't know the reference point. And it's quite an interesting exercise.
That's actually really cool, yeah.
Yeah.
What's next for Action Games?
Well, the app is next on the to-do list, and then I've just negotiating a new distribution agreement, both locally and hopefully overseas. So more of that. Probably once we're allowed to go and see people, I'll probably have to go do some conventions, assuming we still have those kind of things.
They don't go extinct.
Just shake hands, teach the game, and hopefully we'll be able to go to one or two international shows in the course of next year. That's the idea.
Speaking of conventions and stuff changing, like how do you think this new normal that we have is going to change the tabletop industry going forward?
Sure, I don't know. I was just thinking, as I said it to you guys, I saw like the concept of a convention where thousands of geeks who generally not well known for the best hygiene in the world, packed together in a hall. Even before COVID, people would always get ill from at the end of a convention season or whatever. I don't know if we're ever going to see that kind of thing again. I mean, the promoters might say otherwise, but I think the format's going to change, certainly in the next year or two, from a convention point of view.
I suppose we only have this vaccine that Oxford's busy designing at the moment might actually do something.
But if
Really?
you used to get con plague or con flu,
Yeah.
con anyway, so
Yeah,
I mean,
a thing that goes around every media station, every media
not
lounge.
just the media, it's
No, but
people in general.
I'm talking about experience. It's like the media lounge is just like festering with a plague there. Terrible.
It used to be a joke, we go to a convention and you come back with con crud, sore throat, cough. But it's not a joke anymore. That's how our perception has changed. We used to always it was part of the thing. Oh well, you came down with con crud again. And now it's not going to be. It doesn't have the same connotation anymore. It's weird.
Yeah, it is different. I also think that it might drive the evolution of just online tabletop gaming with these virtual tabletops. So just using the avenues that we had before, but didn't actually try and go and look into it, like Discord or Skype or whatever, in order to play. Because I feel like there was work being done and it was going, but I feel like it was very slow. And now this might push virtual tabletops and playing online into a much bigger industry.
I have mixed feelings about it because I'm a crusader for a form of role-playing game which involves no visual reference. So I believe in the so-called theater of the mind role-playing game, and with all the modern virtual tabletops, the functionality is driving a visual experience, and that development is trying to make, to my mind, pretty crappy versions of computer games. We've got great computer games. If you want to play electronic games, you've got amazing stuff you can play. Why are we trying to make the role-playing experience fall into line with the visual experience of a PC game? I'm concerned that is the wrong direction for role-playing games to go in.
I don't see it that way, though. I feel like virtual tabletops allow you to take a lot of like the logistical admin out of it, so there's more time for storytelling, and there are things you could do. Like on Fantasy Grounds, having a dice tower which only allows the dungeon master to see the rolls, I think changes the game completely, because then your players don't know what they rolled, so you just have to then explain and role play it out. So there are ways, I think, of trying to get that video gaming out, because I understand what you're saying. Like, it's very video gamey. You click a button and then something happens, which is what a video game like kind of does when it comes to virtual tabletops. But I think dungeon masters will find clever ways of getting around it and suiting them to different players. I find
that, for me, it's if you describe let's say a dungeon room, and the simplest, oldest dungeon thing in the world, some kind of dungeon room, and you just describe it, and we can be looking at each other on the camera, or we can be just doing vocal, and the mental picture that people create, because of the scope of imagination, is always so much broader than what we can create if we were to draw that on with a grid. And the trouble is, as soon as you do grid it out and you put little minis on the map, my character does this, becomes, I move my mini from here to here. And that's a different, that's a tactical experience. It's not an imaginative experience. That's call me old school, but that's where I'm
I don't think that's a terribly old school way of thinking. I do agree with you that sometimes when the map and the grids do come out, you lose that roleplay side. But in actual fact, like, the roleplay is still happening, but it's just now like in a 2D plane, and it kind of changes things. And you do get like, okay, I move to here, instead of like, okay, I take a few steps to the left, that sort of thing. So I see where you're coming from.
Square, which I know is one square outside the square range of that guy's spell effect.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons why Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition didn't do very well, because of the gaminess, but it's kind of like it's kind of like it's kind of wiggling its way in from a different angle now.
We're trying to make a really, really slow version of World of Warcraft.
Yeah, that's so true.
Okay, speaking of which, good segue to actually to jump in there. What are your top 5 tips that you can give board game developers, to make the game better, so it doesn't turn into a really long World of Warcraft?
Wow. One, just build it. Don't think about it.
Not hardware, guys.
Yeah, not an idea, an actual physical thing. Build it. Whatever it looks like, it can be crap. The moment you start to interact with it and play with it, your design process starts. It doesn't start when you're conceptualizing an imaginative idea of a game. That'd be 1. 2, don't try to be too creative. So I'm just going back to things I've already said. But 3, know what's out there. Like, if you're going to design a board game, you better know what the current state of the board game industry is, in terms of what's out there and what's good and what people like. There's nothing worse than meeting somebody who says to you, I've got this amazing idea for a game, it's going to look like this, and you say, well, have you played this game, which is the sort of staple in the industry of that type of game? And they say, no, I've never heard of it. You have to know what's in the market, so you have to watch a lot of, this is an excuse to watch a lot of game-related media, but just to know what's going on. You need to be prepared to kill your children, in a sense that You can't be wedded to any one of your ideas.
Don't physically kill your children.
Creative children.
Not your real blood and flesh children.
Yes.
Not your fur babies. No. Your
my
ideas.
wife and I decided we're not going to have children. We're not into having children. We're just trying to work out who's going to tell them now. So that would be it, not getting wedded, that sort of my precious syndrome, this idea that I've got this great thing and I sit down in front of the three of you and you play the game and you say, this is crap. And I need to be able to deal with that and to take it on board, and if it's true, to throw it out and redo it. And it's hard. That's probably the hardest thing to do. And then the last thing I think is just be an advocate. Not just say don't just design a game. Be an advocate. If you like games, be an advocate for the games world and profession and industry. If you like computer games, be an advocate for computer games. I think we have that responsibility, particularly coming from a small country like this, which is, in terms of game design, is very behind the rest of the world. We need to do more than just design. We need to advocate, and we need to get involved and have discussions like this. And I'm so grateful to you guys for letting me have it with you, because it's really cool to do it. And I think it's something we need. It's conversations that we need to be having.
Indeed, yeah. I do feel like there needs to be a lot more communication between developers and the people who use their games, and the people who want to share, their stuff and talk about their stuff,
It's hard, it can be very difficult if you don't know anybody. I'm part of a group called SA Board Game Design, and we have we used to have fairly regular meetups, and the idea is that you come to the meeting. There's an introduction. If someone's not been to the meeting before, it's a bit like AA. You meet, you introduce, and then in the beginning, everybody goes around the table and has got a 2-minute pitch of the game design and what they want out of the play test of their game, and then everyone splits up, and you can go and sit in groups, and you can go and say, I'd like to try that game, and we just literally do 1 hour to 2 hours of testing each other's games, discussing it. And it's amazing how hard it is for some people to do it the first time, to arrive with their shoebox of paper and actually show it to somebody else. I think that's one of the hardest things, and just doing it opens up a whole world of opportunity for them.
What is one thing that no one or not many people know about you?
I'm scared of heights, claustrophobic, asthmatic. Actually, the elusive triple, when I think about it.
The problem is you're naming everything that a nerd is, and a geek. We're all pretty much like that.
Yeah, it's true. I suppose that's a good point. Most people don't know. I represent South Africa in karate.
Okay.
So guys, don't fuck with him. He'll kick your ass.
As long as they don't get me in any form of grip, because my claustrophobia.
So no fights against MMA people. No wrestlers.
They scare the crap out of me. The idea of some guy is going to smother you with an arm bar or a leg bar. No, I just get agitated thinking about that.
So if someone does jiu-jitsu, you're stuffed.
No, that's stuff.
What would you?
That's terrifying.
What would you envision a martial arts themed board game look like?
I would show you if I could remember which box it was in.
You have one already, yeah.
Yeah, I've got a sort of Euro game, which is the idea is you're running a dojo, and you've got your little karate men, and they've got little belt grades, and you try and have the most successful dojo, and there's competitions and all sorts of things. Yeah.
Okay. The only one for me that comes to mind, I think, is Onitama. I think that's about martial arts in some way.
Onitama, but Onitama is like the little chess variant. That's a great game, brilliant. Have anyone played Onitama? It's the most amazing thing.
I haven't yet.
got a small like chessboard. You've got 4 normal pieces and 1 king piece. And you draw 4 cards at the beginning of the game, and those are the 4 moves that are allowed. Or I think it's 4 cards. You start with 2 and the opponent has 2, and whenever you make a move on one of the cards, you got to then hand that card to your opponent, and it becomes their move. And it just goes back and forth in a small sort of kind of chess variant. Brilliant design.
Yeah, that sounds a bit like Ambition. You have to hand around cards after you use them. It's really cool. What we didn't talk about is the city. What's going on with the city right now?
Sure. The city is very close to final prototype. It's
well, explain what the city is to people who don't know.
Yeah, you have to explain what the city is because you haven't seen it.
Jeez Louise, that's a big board.
Wow,
that's a whole dining table.
That's the board, and then that box in the background, that silver box is the components. It's oversized at the moment. I haven't thought about production or anything. It's just built. It's like a vanity project. It's built to be a huge, overproduced game, and it's that's my pet project.
Your favorite. Your magnum opus one day.
The earliest map designs up on the wall there. That's from about 7 years ago.
What is it about? Like, how do you play it? What type of game is it?
It's a fantasy city involved in a deadly political struggle, and you play one of 6 factions within the city. I mean, they like the Crown, the Church, the Thieves Guild, the Circle, who are these mad magicians, the Trading Costa, who are these profiteers, and lastly, there's a group of complete anarchists called the Enemy. And you play one of those 6, and the idea is to be the faction that controls the city. It's a point-scoring game, and at the end of the game, the person with the most points will be the winner. Except that each faction has its own special victory condition, which if it pulls off, it wins the game outright immediately and the game comes to an end. So
the great Discord gods have decided to end our little chat with Rob, and it was really fun. I was hoping to get a few more minutes in, but unfortunately we cannot continue any further without Discord. But you can find obviously the SA Geeks at the SA Geeks on all of their avenues. You can find me at Geekoscopy. That's, oh wait, let me switch. Is it backwards? Flip that, no, flip horizontally, there we go. At Geekoscopy at the various avenues. And you can always find Rob Acton at acton.rob, I think, on Instagram. Where he has various things going, and unfortunately, it would be nice to sign out properly, but do go check out Ambition, the board game. I believe you can find it on Takealot in South Africa, and Rob did say that internationally it will be coming at some point soon, which would be nice. But check out Action Games, check out Rob Acton, check out Ambition, and until then, stay tuned and cheers. That's it from the Geek-Inspired Podcast.